I had never missed a single family dinner in 11 years. Not once. Not when I was exhausted. Not when I was unwell. Not even on the evenings when the last thing I wanted was to sit at that table and pretend everything was perfectly fine. I showed up every single time because that is what I believed family required. Presence. Consistency. Loyalty even when it cost you something. So when I missed that one dinner on a rainy Thursday evening in October, nobody in my family believed it was an accident. They thought I was making a statement. They thought I was being difficult. What they did not know was that missing that dinner was the greatest thing that ever happened to me. My name does not matter for this story. What matters is that I was a woman who had spent over a decade believing her family was exactly what it appeared to be on the surface. Warm. United. Honest. I was the second oldest of 4 siblings. My mother was the kind of woman who held the family calendar in her head and the family together by sheer force of personality. Every Thursday evening we gathered at her house for dinner. It was a tradition she had started when we were children and one she protected fiercely as we grew into adults with our own lives. Missing that dinner was simply not something any of us did. It was understood without ever being spoken. You showed up. No matter what. For 11 years I showed up. That October Thursday I genuinely could not make it. I had been working on a critical project at my job for weeks and the deadline had been moved forward without warning. By the time I looked up from my desk it was already past 7 in the evening and the dinner had been going for an hour. I sent a message to the family group explaining. I apologized. I said I would call my mother in the morning. Nobody replied. I did not think much of it that night. I finished my work, drove home, and went to bed earlier than usual, feeling the particular exhaustion of someone who had been running on very little for too long. But what I did not know that evening was that while I was sitting at my desk working, something was happening at that Thursday dinner that nobody intended for me to find out about. The conversation that took place at that table while my chair sat empty was one that changed the way I understood my entire family. I found out 3 days later. Not because anyone told me, but because my youngest sister called me in tears, having carried the guilt of what she had heard for longer than she could manage. And what she told me quietly over the phone on a Sunday morning cracked my world completely open. My youngest sister Sophie had always been the quietest one in our family. The one who observed more than she spoke. The one who noticed things the rest of us were too busy or too comfortable to see. She told me that evening after I missed dinner the conversation had turned to me. Not in the warm way families sometimes discuss an absent member. Not with concern or fondness. With frustration. With judgment. And with details that told me the people sitting at that table knew things about my private life that I had never shared with any of them. My older sister had been talking. For a long time apparently. About my marriage. About my finances. About decisions my husband and I had made privately that I had confided only to her during a vulnerable moment 2 years earlier. She had shared all of it. Every private detail I had trusted her with had been laid out at that dinner table for the whole family to discuss and form opinions about. But it was not just the sharing that destroyed something in me. It was what came next. My mother had listened to all of it and then said something Sophie could not bring herself to repeat at first. She said that maybe I was not as capable as everyone assumed. That maybe the family had been giving me too much credit for too long. I sat with the phone pressed to my ear in complete silence as Sophie spoke. I did not interrupt. I just listened. And with every word something I had believed about my family for 30 years quietly fell apart. The grief that came after that phone call was not loud. It was the slow, quiet kind that settles into your chest and stays there. I had trusted my older sister Rachel with the most vulnerable parts of myself. I had gone to her during one of the hardest seasons of my marriage, not for gossip, but for support. I had shared things I had never told anyone else because I believed she was safe. She was not safe. She had taken everything I gave her in confidence and handed it to the very people whose opinions I had feared most. I spent 3 days barely sleeping, going over every conversation Rachel and I had shared over the years, wondering what else had been passed along, what other private moments of mine had become dinner table conversation while I sat across from these people completely unaware. On the 4th day something shifted. The grief began to harden into something else. Not anger exactly. More like clarity. The kind that arrives when you finally stop seeing people the way you wished they were and start seeing them the way they actually are. I made a decision. I was not going to confront Rachel emotionally. I was not going to call my mother in tears. I was not going to give anyone in that family the satisfaction of watching me fall apart over what they had done. I was going to let them show me exactly who they were. And I was going to respond accordingly. Until everything changed at the very next Thursday dinner when I walked in and sat down and waited. I showed up the following Thursday as if nothing had happened. I brought dessert the way I always did. I hugged my mother at the door. I sat in my usual chair and I smiled and I participated in the conversation and I watched. Rachel was visibly uncomfortable from the moment I walked in. She kept glancing at Sophie. Sophie kept her eyes on her plate. My mother seemed pleased that things appeared normal. About halfway through dinner I set down my fork and said very calmly that I wanted to share something with the family. The table went quiet. I told them that I had heard about the conversation that had taken place the Thursday I missed. I did not raise my voice. I did not look at Rachel with anger. I simply stated what I knew with complete calm and complete clarity. I told them that I was aware my private life had been discussed without my knowledge or my consent. I told them I was aware of what had been said about my capabilities and my marriage. And I told them that I wanted them all to know I had heard every word. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I had ever experienced at that table. Rachel went pale. My mother opened her mouth and closed it again. Nobody spoke for what felt like a very long time. I did not wait for apologies that evening. I finished my dinner. I thanked my mother for the food. And I left at my usual time without drama and without tears. But I left differently than I had ever left before. Because I left knowing exactly who was in that room and exactly how much of myself I would be sharing with them going forward. Rachel called me the next morning. She apologized. It was a long apology filled with explanations and justifications and a great deal of her own feelings about why she had done what she did. I listened to all of it. Then I told her I accepted her apology and that things between us would need to look different from now on. She asked what I meant by different. I told her it meant I would always love her as my sister, but I would never again offer her access to the parts of me that required trust she had not earned back. The Thursday dinners continued. I still attended most of them. But I attended them as a woman who finally understood the difference between family loyalty and blind loyalty. Between showing up out of love and showing up out of fear of what people might say in your absence. Here is what that one missed dinner gave me. It gave me the truth. And as painful as that truth was, it was far better than the comfortable lie I had been living inside for 11 years. Sometimes the chair you leave empty reveals more than the one you always fill. Pay attention to what happens in the rooms you are not in. Because that is where you will find out who people truly are. And knowing that, as hard as it is, will always set you free.